Participants are loading. Welcome and thank you for joining. My name is Ashley Lusick, and I am a health educator for community health at Atlantic Health System. Today's webinar, Healing Rituals for Grief, is presented by Marian Tihan. Marian is a licensed clinical social worker with over 35 years experience in hospital social work, administration, and consulting, managing the Thomas Glasser Caregiver Center at Overlook Medical Center since its founding 10 years ago. Before we begin, I have a few announcements. This webinar is being recorded. All participants are muted. If you have a question, please use the Q&A for questions or chat for comments. We will try to get through all questions at the end of the presentation. Are you or a loved one interested in smoking cessation? Atlantic Health System offers a free quit smoking program. This program includes an individual assessment, free nicotine replacement products, and 6 weekly group meetings to help you quit and stay smoke-free. There are multiple dates and times available, with groups available in person or virtually. For more information about these groups and other resources, or for additional dates and times, please call 1-844-472-8499. I'm now going to turn it over to Marian.
Hi. My name again is Marian Tihan, and I'm really honored to be here. And thank you to Community Health for organizing this. It's a very special topic and near and dear to my heart. So thank you all for coming today. Let's see from the beginning. Okay, so today I wanted to share with you healing rituals for grief. And when we think of rituals, at least when I thought of rituals pre-COVID, I really thought of rituals as very formal, like a wedding, a funeral. I never thought in terms of like private rituals for grief. And I want to share with you, I'm the manager of the Caregiver Center here at Overlook. And as you saw on the news and all through COVID, so many people were not allowed and able to have a funeral for their loved one because of restrictions. And this is what got me into really exploring other ways to have rituals, which then led me to finding very personal rituals, because it's never too late to do a ritual, right? So rituals are very powerful experiences that they really transform the loss and struggle. And it's like almost a kickstart when you're on your healing journey. I know we're always looking for tools and different ways to manage and to get through this grief. And I think private, which we'll talk about today, kind of personal grief rituals can really kind of jumpstart and keep you going on that journey. So I'm really glad you're here today. I know at times this can be a tough topic. And so I invite you just to be very gentle and practice good self-care. If you're getting upset, just maybe letting the tears flow and maybe stepping away. But what I hope to really do today is to bring you some practical tools for some healing in grief. And we can heal in grief, right? We can. There's always hope. So thank you. So why do we need rituals? And this kind of shows really clearly how our brain is when we're in grief, especially acute grief. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross in the 1960s wrote her famous book, on death and dying. And she really made very popular and mainstream the stages of grief. And they're wonderful, but she never intended them to be so linear. And I think we judge ourselves, we're not where we're supposed to be. So grief is not those, 5 places. It is actually like this jumbled up circle, and we go back and forth. And the rituals can really help us when we are in this process. So really grief, as we know, is really messy, and it affects us like physically. I mean, I run support groups, and I know I hear all the time, how you're holding that grief in your body. It affects us mentally. we get confused. We really disorganized brain, a grief brain. It affects us socially, spiritually. So in every area of our life, right, this grief really impacts us. So I want to talk about the healing power of rituals. So if you think with funerals, and now during COVID, people were not able to have their traditional uh, funerals, or even to be comforted by others. So they had to do this in isolation. So we had to get creative and really figure out ways to do this. But the funerals really have a purpose. They have a purpose because they start your journey from grief to mourning. So the grief is what we hold inside, and then that mourning is when we take it and we go public. So if you're sitting Shiva, if you're having a funeral, a wake, a celebration of life, all of those traditions and rituals help us start this journey. And sometimes maybe the funeral isn't what you needed. And that's okay, because we can redo things, right? And we can have small personal rituals. Maybe you're too much in a fog to take in, but it really does serve a purpose. And I think in our culture, we're getting away from having funerals, and going more into that celebration of life where maybe the body is not there, right? So we're kind of missing that step. And it can leave a lot of us feeling at a loss. So the ritual can make us feel some sense of control, some confidence, right? Your whole world is rocked when someone you love dies. And think about it. When a death occurs or a major loss in your life, we don't know what to do, right? There were no words, but springing into action and planning that funeral kind of puts people into action. And people come and they bring food, and also those services can really connect us on a spiritual plane, transcending. So we're not going to talk about ritual research, but Harvard did do, and there's a lot of research, but I just wanted to share with you. I think this is very interesting because really when they interviewed people about rituals, and this is my experience as well, that the rituals are mostly private and secular, right? And individual. But we don't even realize we're kind of doing these rituals. So I have my mother's ring. She died when I was very young. I wear that every day. People always comment on it, and I'm able to connect with my mother in that way. I know people in my support groups often will be wearing clothes, keeping a sweater. We want to maintain that connection, and rituals can help us to connect with our grief and maintain that connection. I'm going to skip over that one for a minute. But so what makes a ritual a ritual? So it has intentionality, there's actions, there's symbolism, and we'll kind of go through all this. But I think before, I just really want to share with you just a simple exercise. And actually, you could call this a ritual, like a grounding ritual, because what we're going to be discussing today, is hard. And all the personal rituals that we'll talk about today kind of start with this exercise. So if you can, and I can't see you, but I invite you, just if you can, just connecting with your breath. So just notice your breath, breathing in and then breathing out. And place your hands on your knees if that's comfortable. And just really feel a connection of the chair on your thighs and your sit bones, and going down your legs. Feel the bottom of your feet really connected to the earth. That grounded feeling, because in grief, we can feel very much out of control and scared and lost. So this is just a simple practice where you can just take a moment by yourself in a room and sit and connect with your breath. We all have our breath, right? So breathing in and letting go, a nice exhale. And this is just a simple grounding. And now today, and this is all invitational, I would invite you maybe to take your hands up to your heart. Take and keep breathing, of course, breathing is good, right? And just breathing in and out and just feel your heartbeat. And today I would invite you maybe just to think about why you're here, who you're here honoring. Is there someone you really miss? And you can say their name right now out loud. So I would be saying Richard right now. So just taking in this little bit of time just to feel grounded, connected to the earth, right? And not so lost, and paying honor. And that's what we really want to do today, is just share these rituals. And then just letting your hands return. If you had your eyes closed, you can open them, right? So that is just the beginning of any kind of grief personal ritual. So you'll hear a lot about mindfulness, right? Mindfulness-based stress reduction. And mindfulness is just being present and aware without judgment. So when you think about grief, our minds are all over. So we really want to bring ourselves in and be able to connect with the grief. So it's a little different than the messages you'll get from family and friends who want you to move on. We're saying here, I'm saying, and the research says, it's really, you need to say hello to your grief, right? And we really don't, that's unpleasant. But in order to get through this grief and to transform, so we talk a lot about transformation, right? Because we can't sit with this heaviness and this despair all the time. We need to engage and incorporate the grief and transform the grief. And that takes process, it takes time, but it takes work. And I believe that these rituals can really kind of jump start you. And I just want to share, so during COVID, I would be driving to work and I just didn't even realize some of the rituals I had in my life and I wasn't aware. So my dad was in the Navy and he also worked like loading trucks and stuff. So this is just, it's a little sailor guy and he had it in his apartment. I didn't even realize this when I cleared out his apartment, but I had it here on my desk. And in my car, he had died in March, but Valentine's Day, he loved chocolate. And I gave him a little box of chocolate, which he shouldn't have probably had, and a little teddy bear. And I realized that teddy bear is in my car as well. And on the turnpike, I go right by where he used to work. I can see the company where he loaded the trucks, right? And I would touch the bear. But I never really put this together, you know, because he just died a few years ago. But I was doing that, and those were rituals. Wearing my mother's ring was a ritual. So here, personally, over the last 11 years, I've had many losses in my life, but I also have gotten to know many families who've had losses, and many times they'll send me, you know, the prayer cards. And I realized too, I had a whole collection. But I honored those and I honored the lives that had passed. So, but it helped me, right? So that was like a ritual for me to honor those families that I've worked with and their loved ones. And it enabled me to do this work. So, you know, you probably can even think about rituals you might be doing that you're not even aware of, right? So we all want to find meaning. And sometimes we can't find meaning in a loss, but I think rituals can be kind of really helpful in finding that meaning. So when we look at what makes up a ritual, so what's different is that intentionality. is knowing that you're going to take this time and go into the space and do something and have symbols. So whatever they may be, and we'll talk about that. And rituals go in a certain sequence, right? There's a beginning, a middle, and an end. But most important is your heart is there and your spirit. So when we think of really special rituals, like think of graduation, you walk across and you shake a hand, but we shake hands all the time. But how powerful that moment is, right, in the graduation. Very powerful. And you get goosebumps, right? So here, this is a slide, and all of this really is from the Center for Loss with Dr. Alan Wolfelt, who I have studied with for many years now. And he has a really good book on grief rituals that I will share with you. But he wrote a whole book, a little book about this, about rituals and the importance of them. So setting your intention. So going in with a purpose makes it a little different. Now, the ones I was doing, I didn't realize what I was doing. So now when I do those, I have a little bit more insight and intention when I'm doing them. And affirmations, I just love affirmations. So it's that hope of what we want to be, what we want to happen. And again, that being present, getting back to that mindfulness, I think in grief, and sometimes we need to keep busy, right? But sometimes we need to pay attention to the grief or it's going to come knocking. So if we push down grief, and many of us have losses from early on that maybe we never even got to really reconcile with and really mourn that person or that situation. But it's, again, never too late to do that. But we need to be present and to be aware to do that. So we talk about gathering symbols. So symbols such as pictures and books, but they're so unique and different for each person. I have these stones that I love and I can hold them, and a bell. So not everybody has a bell, but like starting and then at the end. So just making it a little bit special, finding a place in your home. And it doesn't have to be a room, whole Zen room. I mean, it can just be this chair, but you have like a box then of those symbols, like what represents your grief to you. For me, it's pictures, a book, the mass cards. So for my family, but you gather different symbols. And then just having that space and scheduling it, right? Taking the time, because we can get so caught up in the busyness, maybe we don't take the time to attend to our grief, but it does need time and some work. And this is a really nice way to connect and to keep that bond. And that's a whole nother part really about grief. And I know I did one a few months ago on the myths, and we spoke about this, is really that we want to encourage you, and I do, is to maintain the bond, right? To keep the memories alive, not squish them down. And a ritual then is a really way to connect and to keep that connection and that love. Right? Many times they say grief, is love with nowhere to go. But we have that love and it doesn't ever leave us. And I don't know if she mentioned, but if you have any thoughts or questions, I actually can't see the chat, so we might have to do it at the end. Sometimes I can see it. What I thought we might do is I'll just show you some individual grief rituals. So that grounding one that we did, for instance, just simply coming into your space, taking those deep breaths, feeling that connection and feeling grounded, right? And kind of silencing your mind. You're going to have thoughts, and that's okay. Let the thoughts come and just say, okay, because we can't quiet our mind completely. But I think, so one of them on here we could do is the photo frame. I kind of like this photo frame one. So in the photo frame, you would set your intention. So you would gather pictures, okay, and maybe a frame. And this may not be, you tailor everything to yourself, but this is one that's in the book. So you gather pictures and you get a special frame and you sit down in your area. And then you kind of center yourself, right? Just connecting to your breath, feeling your heartbeat, setting your intention. So you can just, in this grief ritual, my intention, is to think about all the ways your loved one impacted you, right? So really thinking about, the love. So you go through these pictures and you take your symbols, and you might have like a little box with some symbols or bigger, and you bring those out, whatever they may be. And then you start to create a collage, right? So with these pictures, and the action, so there's always an action in a ritual, and that's what sets it apart as well. The action is really telling your story, writing on the back of each picture, right? Because telling our story, that's why people go to grief support groups. That's why they find, someone they can talk to. Telling your story is so important. So telling your story on the back of that picture, right? Where were you? What happened? How did you feel? Right? What did that photo capture about them that made it so special? So digging a little deeper and taking that time. So that's the action. And then you would kind of put this collage together, and then you can keep it, right? You can have that, and you can keep that in your space. You can hang it on another wall. And then you express that gratitude. And this is another part of the ritual, the gratitude. And it's really like, what did you experience? Like, I'm so grateful I got to remember that trip. Or oh, wow, that was such a really good day that we went to the beach. Whatever it might be. So expressing that gratitude for this little bit of time that you took to do this. And then the affirmation. So that affirmation is really taking your intention and being very positive and hopeful, So I honor these memories because they're a part of me. So each ritual has that same kind of format. And again, you can tweak it, you change it, but I'm just trying to share with you this outline. So you always center yourself, right? That's step one. And then you set that intention for whatever ritual it may be. And then incorporating the action, taking out those symbols, and then speaking that gratitude and that affirmation at the end. You could do this with a favorite song, right? Music is so powerful. And some people really have a hard time even listening to music. It activates them. And so you're in the car and now you're crying, or you're in ShopRite. And that's can be very, again, unsettling. Like, that's not, you want to be in control. But that's what's nice about these rituals, is that you're choosing the time and the place and the how to tap into your grief, to connect with it. And I really want to share with you about dosing, right? So you're going into the grief and really mourning, right? Bringing it out, bringing those emotions, moving the emotions. But you can't do that all the time, right? We have to function. So dosing is really important, because no one can live like that all the time. And no one wants you to, right? So I think by creating either a morning ritual or an evening, that you give the attention, and then you can come out. Know you're safe. You're safe in there, right? You're safe in this sacred space that you've created in this time, but you'll come out. Maybe you'll have shed some tears, but there's hope you're going to feel better. And this really does work. There's letter writing, certain smells. So there's all different ways. And I will share with you, of course, this outline so you'll have it. So they're really kind of very powerful ways to get a little deeper into the work of grief. So, and all of these really are very holistic, right? So you're centering yourself, you're grounding yourself, and that really brings in mindfulness, which we hear about all the time. And there's wonderful apps, Headspace and Calm, about being mindful, and that's setting your intention, right? What do you hope for today? And there's a hello ritual, and it's really saying hello to your grief, right? So you're centering yourself, you're getting into that, maybe that little space that you have your box of symbols, maybe you light a candle, and you set your intention for this ritual. And so, for instance, in the hello ritual, maybe you're saying, I want to understand my grief. I want to understand this, all the different parts of this grief. That's my intention. So you have your symbols, and whatever they may be, you take them and you can hold them. And then pick things that represent your grief, right? So for some reason, this really has become, it's a World War II. My father was a vet and definitely suffered from PTSD from the war. But this is a little Navy figurine with a tattoo, and he had tattoos. But it reminds me of like the picture when he was in the Navy as a young man at 17 and his stories when he had fun, right? And he didn't talk about the war very much, but it really connects me. So it's so unique what will connect you to your loved one. So you incorporate them, you're looking at them, you're holding them, right? And just really wanting to understand all these feelings and emotions and pain. And then you speak your gratitude, right? And again, it's about what came up for you. So for me, when I do that, I remember my dad, laughing and being happy. And that helps me, right? And not to remember maybe the last few years of his life, which were a real struggle for him and for I as a caregiver. And then you close again with that affirmation. So like your intention was to get to know your grief. So maybe the affirmation is like, the more I get to know my grief, the more I can understand it, right? And with that understanding, hopefully can come some healing and some movement forward. So I just want to go back. Oh, sorry. I'm going to go back to this slide here about the 6 needs of mourning. Oh, sorry. Look, it took me back here. Sorry, guys. So the 6 needs of mourning, and this could be a whole webinar in and of itself. But this is again, Dr. Alan Wolfelt, and David Kessler has his needs of mourning, but they're all basically different words and say the same thing. And I love how Dr. Wolfelt says this. So in order to really take our grief and move it and reconcile it and to go through this, there's 6 needs of mourning. So acknowledging the reality of the death, right? So because your head and your heart have to come together. So oftentimes the funeral, whatever service you might be having, kind of jumpstarts that, acknowledging the reality, accepting it, because months later, people will tell me they still expect, at 6 o'clock, they'll almost hear that car coming in the driveway. So these are very real experiences, and that acknowledgement takes time, acknowledging the reality. So there are rituals you can do just for that one. So embracing the pain of the loss. And again, we're talking about these rituals as coming into that space and really embracing it. Something I think our friends and family will tell us to do the opposite, right? They don't want to see you cry and they want to see you get better. And really important is that bond. I talked about those bonds, remembering the person who died, right? So all different types of rituals give us the opportunity to remember them. And not just a fleeting, right? But to really remember them, to develop a new self-identity. So this comes, of course, and there's so many different kind of parts of grief, right? Early grief, acute grief is like right after, and then that early grief is really for 1 or 2 years. So that new self-identity, though, is always a question that comes up in our support groups, and in my sessions, especially if it's been a child or a spouse or a partner. And again, how that will impact who you are, So there are rituals to really work on you and to honor you, maintaining that connection with your loved one. And that meaning, really, really hard, but to search for some meaning. And people can really struggle with this. And so there are some really good rituals for that. And then he talks about the 6th need of mourning, receiving and accepting help from others, right? And you're here today. Something, you saw this grief rituals and it spoke to you in some way. So you are looking for some help, right? And I think a lot of times people will, your friends and family are very well-meaning, but they kind of want you to get over it because they don't like to see you in pain. So finding that space, that little space in your home where it can become sacred sanctuary, and you can dose, right? And dose yourself and really embrace the loss and the feelings, and not to make yourself suffer. No, this is to really, so you can work through it, because the pain is there, right? It could be buried down, it's there, but bringing it forth. So there's lots of different ways to move it through. And a lot of the, in this book, Grief One Day at a Time, right? There's rituals, planting your garden ritual. There's a ritual, letter writing, which a lot of people have heard probably, writing a letter, and really creating your own, right? What's special for you. So in here, there's water rituals, stargazing rituals. So I think too, in grief, connecting with nature, and, so even if you do some of these rituals outside, but just knowing you're connected to the earth and to such a bigger universe, right? Can be very helpful. And even bringing in parts of nature into your grief rituals can also be helpful. So there's a lot, and I really have to share with you, the reason I dove deeper into this really was because of COVID, and watching and working with families who couldn't have those funerals, but the resilience that I saw and the creativity, right? With Zoom and all different ways that we really worked on honoring and loving, and I'm sure in your own life, like a lot of people do rituals such as a 5K run, going to mass or maybe to temple, like religious services. There's so many different rituals, family rituals, right? Having a toast at the holidays. So there's so many ways to keep, and it's all about really keeping that memory alive. And those are really important as well. But it's nice to know that you have the capability, that you alone, right, can really kind of jumpstart and really work through your grief. Let's see. So again, the ingredients, and you're going to get these slides so you'll see them. And again, here are some others. Favorite song, we talked about the anniversary. So I think sometimes families have traditions, rituals around anniversaries, but we're not limited to that special day, the birthday or the anniversary. And then, of course, forgiveness, right? Yeah. So, and this is somewhere, you can be directed, and maybe you were really hard on yourself, or there were issues in the relationship. So these are opportunities really for growth. And it's transcending. And I think that's the difference, right? It's very transcending. We talked. So really thinking outside the box, right? So what would be important to you, to create your own grief ritual? And hopefully we definitely have time for questions. And I just wanted to share too, there's really wonderful books. This one again is by Dr. Wolfelt, and I will send this list out. But as simple as just every day, it's a daily reader. Just reading that and taking time just to read and to sit, and maybe because some of the quotes, I didn't even look what today's was, but they're usually pretty good. So here, fear is a natural reaction to moving closer to the truth, right? And then there's a whole fear can be a big baby. So it's all about fear. And then at the end, it says, when I'm afraid, it's okay. It just means I'm moving closer to the truth. And here, each day, I will give myself at least 1 minute of focused patience. That was about patience. So this is one mindful day at a time. There's grief one day at a time. Many people probably have seen, this is healing after loss, daily meditations. So there are these things available to really guide us and to help us. So you don't have to do this all on your own. And even really Googling and looking up. But again, it's all about making it meaningful to you. So my symbols would be very different than your symbols. And your grief is so unique, right? It's like our fingerprint. It's just so different in how we're going to deal with it. And within our families, how we support each other. But as we heal and transform our grief into love and reconcile with it and integrate it, we help those around us too. And you can invite them, because of course there's group rituals, right? I think for me, the idea of a formal ritual with my family, we never did that. That's not like our family. And so as a young girl, when my mother died, we didn't do anything like that. So there were no rituals really. And it was very, it was hard. We didn't talk about it. And it's why I'm a social worker and why I went into social work. And I have worked 35 years in hospice and palliative care and caregivers. And so grief really impacts us on so many levels, but it's never too late, right, to do these rituals, to attend to the grief and to take that grief and bring it out into that mourning and to make it public. Yeah. So let's check with Ashley. Do we have any questions? Should I stop sharing, Ashley? Will I see the questions then, or?
If you stop sharing, you will be able to also see the
Oh, great.
questions.
Yeah, or in the chat, right? So I don't see any yet, but let's see. Or in the Q&A, but I didn't check that one.
So just a reminder to anyone that is interested in asking questions, the Q&A only the hosts can see versus the chat everyone can see. So if you have a more
Oh, okay.
personal question and you don't want your name attached to it, the Q&A would be a better option. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to utilize that Q&A.
Yeah. Might take a while to type in there.
Yeah.
Yeah. But again, meaningful rituals are really what's important to you. Um, and think about, like, for instance, I didn't know I was doing those rituals, right? And here I'm a social worker with all this training and grief and loss. But COVID changed a lot of things. COVID was very hard. It was hard to be a social worker, right? And it was hard to support the families. But I was very much in awe of the families that I worked with and how they were able to create meaningful ceremonies. And those ceremonies have a purpose. They guide us on that journey. And yeah, so thinking outside the box, right? So do we have the Q&A? Do we
We
have
do
any
have
there?
some.
Yeah, good.
So one is, how do you manage grief when your loved one was compromised in their
Oh,
last several weeks of life?
yeah. And I think I'm so sorry you're going through that. And I think those memories of our loved ones, if they suffered, right? And a lot of times they do suffer, and we have to watch them suffer. Those pictures are really hard. And I think by compromised, you probably mean very ill and not themselves. I'm assuming, but yeah, it's really hard. And I think part of that is telling that story, sharing it with a trusted person or a support group or a counselor, writing about it, doing a ritual, but because we want to work through that and we want to be able to remember them back, maybe when they weren't compromised, right? So for me, when I have that silly statue, right, of my dad, and I look, it really does remind me of this picture when he first joined the Navy. And he was happy. And so, yeah, I'm sorry you're going through that. And I hope maybe it is hard, but I think working through it I think talking about it, writing about it. Yeah.
We do have another question of, how often would you practice rituals?
So that is entirely up to you. Some people like do a morning ritual, especially if you're going to just like the simple one where you're taking a book and reading it, or an evening one. Boy, you can do them as much as you want, right? But I think so the rituals we talked about, like more anniversary ones, they're wonderful, but I think to really have them really work, I think a little bit more often. That's my personal opinion. But again, no pressure. And I think sometimes we can be our own hardest critic. Like, we should be doing this. Oh, I didn't do my ritual today. No, this shouldn't be work, right? We don't want to beat ourselves up because we can judge ourselves how we should be in grief. And that's that we should be doing this and that, and I should be here. You're right where you need to be.
Another question asking if there are any books or resources that you could recommend
Yes,
specifically for loss of a spouse.
yes. Oh, definitely. Yeah, and I will do that. I'm putting the list together. I thought I would have it done for today, but I will add that as well. And also, I think with a spouse and partner, loss is so profound, and there are some really good books. And also, there's support groups that are one I do here with Maggie Brady from Oncology. We run a bereavement support group that is just for spouses and partners because it's such a unique loss. So, but I will definitely share those resources.
This one's asking about suggestions of changing self-identity because it's
Mm.
hard when one's identity is as a couple.
Oh, again, this comes up so much in our groups, the groups that I run. And oftentimes, maybe they don't even call. Like you lose friends and then you gain friends, but that identity, because people are married 50 years, like you're their right arm, and that is so hard. And who are you? And these are very difficult questions, right? And again, I really would suggest, I find, and grief groups are really helpful. I think there's I can add that there's also David Kessler. They does, oh, I'm not sorry, What's Your Grief has like a lot of writing prompts, and we do a writing group here as well for grief. Expressive writing can really help you to work through. So it's all kind of about really hitting it on head on and working through it. And sometimes we need help to do that. But there are great books and also websites, which I'll share.
Someone wrote that they saw the last point of forgiveness on one of the slides. Can you please explain how they can practice and follow that?
The forgiveness ritual, right? Yeah. So that's in grief, some of the toughest, right? Is how, are you forgiving yourself or even forgiving them? So having a ritual about forgiveness, and you know what? I can just send that particular one, because someone's really interested in that, and I get that. And again, it would be centering yourself, but taking those symbols that would be about that forgiveness and writing about it. Sometimes just writing it out, but a lot of forgiveness is that self-compassion and learning to practice that self-compassion. And forgiving yourself is the first step, right? And loving yourself. Yeah. Yeah, the forgiveness is really a challenge. And oftentimes in a group work, people don't want to be that vulnerable and really share that kind of work. So I will send that just so you have that particular one as well. Yeah. And I also will be adding, Ashley, right, my contact information. And you can definitely reach out to me by email or by telephone.
Another question we have is, I feel guilty for making my mom a DNR. How do you deal with that type of grief?
I'm really sorry you had to do that. I wish families never were put in that position, because we shouldn't be, right? It's a medical decision. And somehow this DNR has been made to be, like we're the doctors, and we're not the doctors. But for some reason with that particular order, they ask the families, and it puts such a burden. So I'm really sorry that you had that burden. And that can be very painful. And again, I really believe addressing that, right? Talking to someone about it. Someone who can really relieve you the guilt, because you shouldn't feel guilty, because they wouldn't have been asking if they didn't feel it was in the best interest. I just wish they didn't ask. I wish they could just say to you, but that's paternalistic, and then they're not going to do that, right? We have rights. But I think I think it's hard. A lot of people struggle with that. And I would say, if you were interested in a support group, once again, or some reading, and again, you can always reach out to me. I could maybe find some really good articles for you. I think that will relieve some of your guilt, because you shouldn't feel guilty. But it's easy for me to say that. You have to believe it. And that's transformation, and ritual can help with that.
Another is asking that even with therapy, grief yoga, support groups, etc., that they're still feeling numb. Is there anything else that they can do to move forward with their grief?
I know. I know you can do all these things, right? Grief yoga is wonderful. I know. So you've tried everything. Um, I would really give these rituals a try. I'm going to put the book, there's a few books out with grief rituals, but I really would say this devoted time, um, it really does work. Yeah. I mean, the evidence, but I know from my personal experience and from my experience working with this really does work. It got me very excited because I was like, wow, this is powerful stuff and I want to share it. Um, and we only have like this webinar and it's hard, but if you're interested in some more, through the Caregiver Center, I might be offering some grief movement and also some more about rituals and doing them together, right? Because maybe we need to practice some together some more to feel comfortable. But yeah, when you've gone to the group and you've done this and it's still feeling numb, no joy. And really we want people, right, to reconcile that and to be able to have that. So yeah, I would say try the rituals. Yeah.
So this next question is pertaining to sleep difficulties and grief. It states that their son used to live with them, who has now passed, and while they were alive, they would pass their room before going to bed. They would always say good night, and they still do that. Since they don't sleep well since the death, is this ritual contributing to sleep difficulties?
So it all, I don't think it's probably contributing. Yeah. I mean, but that's my personal opinion, and I would need to know a little more. But in my experience, that a lot of people, they still talk to their loved ones, right? So they say good morning, maybe to their picture. They say good night. So I don't think it's contributing. Yeah. But sleep can be a real, in grief, in life. So I could also add, we do have some articles just about sleep, general sleep habits. So what do you do in the middle of the night? And all these thoughts are racing, a lot of times keeping a journal next to your bed and just writing it down, right? Or maybe working on some of these other rituals, yeah. But saying goodnight, I don't think is disturbing your sleep, right? No.
Another one that we have, would your suggestions be the same for helping a child deal with the loss of a grandparent, or are there different things to do for a child?
Oh, so children. Oh, and if you can love, you can grieve, right? So very young, they can grieve, and they grieve so differently, right? One minute they're this, and next minute they're fine. So that's an interesting, I would say a lot of art, like just expressive play with children with grief. It's not my specialty. I work with adults. But Imagine and Good Grief are two beautiful programs that have wonderful resources. And I'll add them to that list as well. So Imagine is in Westfield and Mountainside, and Good Grief is in Morristown, where they have wonderful resources and activities you can do. And there's great kids' books on that website. So children, but I think including them in rituals is beautiful, letting them, do the pictures with you and writing on the back, and they make their collage, keeping those memories alive of that grandparent. Yeah. So definitely rituals are, they again very tailored towards a child, but a lot of art, I think, reading, but talking, right? Letting them share, but keeping those memories alive. So they know what grandpa's favorite food was, and they'll always know that. And maybe they'll make that, right? Those traditions and keeping those stories is really important with children, and allowing them to express, and they're going to express grief very differently. Yeah, but those are really good. Imagine and Good Grief we refer to and we work with very closely.
So the last question we have open right now
Mhm,
states that they weren't able to be there with their mother
mhm.
in their final illness. How do they get over the guilt of not physically being there while dealing with grief over the loss?
Yeah. And so many, and I don't know if your situation was COVID. And a lot of times it's because we're away or we live far away. There's millions of reasons, right? But that guilt is profound. And again, that self-compassion, and talking about it with someone you trust. Um, and I know I repeat myself, but I really believe in the value of the support group or individual. Because but it's really learning to have that self-compassion and to forgive yourself. And rituals can really be very healing, right? Right. I am really believing giving loving kindness to yourself, So a ritual about, again, forgiveness, letting whoever, I am so sorry I was not present, right? And incorporating that in your own personal ritual. Can still say it. Yeah. So the important thing is that it's never too late to work on losses. And sometimes we have multiple losses, and you just deal with the one that's most present at that time. Because people will ask me that often. Because right. So which one is in your heart and on your mind, that's the one you can deal with. Yeah. But there is help out there. I think that's really important. There's groups, there's books, there's some websites. Um, and I will be giving you my contact information. And, Atlantic Health offers a weekly grief group as well. So there's a lot of support. And I'm so glad that you took this time, right? Time out of your busy calendar to come and, to learn and to look for what could help. And I'm sorry I can't see you. I wish we could be in person, but this is a good start. And so, maybe we can continue in a smaller venue, right, here at the Caregiver Center and work on some rituals and some movement. So,
All right. So with no remaining questions,
okay, all right. But again, thank you so much. And I will be putting those resources together, and this will help me because some of them now will be particular to your questions. And again, my contact information will be there. So just wishing you lots of peace. Thank you so much for joining today.
yes, thank you everyone for joining. We kindly ask that you take a few minutes after today's webinar to complete the program survey. The link to the survey has also been added to the chat for your convenience. A special thank you to Marion for dedicating your time and expertise today. If you have additional questions or comments, you can also send an email to communityhealth@atlantichealth.org or call 1-844-472-8499. That
Should I
concludes.
put my email in the chat quick? Is that
You could
okay?
throw you
Yeah,
could throw that in the chat quick, and I'll also send it out via email to the participants.
it's not that quick. I'm typing here.
That's okay.
Okay.
All right, so you should all be seeing that email in the chat, and I will also add the community health to the chat,
Okay. Good.
and that will all be in your inboxes shortly as well. Thank you, and I hope
Okay.
everybody has a great day.
All right. Thank you. Bye bye.